My trip to Sweden for Easter 2019. This is a very informal podcast, and I'll be relying on some scratchy notes. I'll struggle to read my own handwriting. Apologies. So to begin with, I want to thank my wife, who put together the itinerary for me very diligently in great detail. I needed that help. And who wanted me to go to Sweden as a blessing to me. I don't think it was just to get rid of me. Maybe that was part of it. No. I never thought it would happen. I always liked the idea, but I always just ignored it and passed it off. But she made it happen. And with the encouragement from my sister-in-law, who gave us an extra special check for having helped in her daughter's wedding, my lovely niece Hannah. And so she put on the bottom of that, perhaps for Sweden with a question mark. That only encouraged my wife. And then she had the nerve to call my dad and asked if he'd like to contribute. And he said it was so generous of her to help. Whereas he helped very generously, he and my mom, his wife Mary. So I have several people there to thank so much for a wonderful trip. And the trip was amazing. The land is so beautiful. I can certainly see why Swedes chose Minnesota, with all the birch trees and the rock and the hills and the water and the lakes and streams. Rather quite similar. So, just beautiful land. I mean, even the driving was nice. I wouldn't mind at all riding a motorcycle there. The speed limits are slower than they are here, and people generally obey them unless they're driving an Audi, it seemed. But nothing like the sort of aggressive driving you get in bigger cities in the U.S. for sure. And the people are just very friendly. They don't look at you when they walk by you. They don't say hello. Not in that way. Everyone minds their own business. But if you ever have a question, practically for anybody, they're very friendly, very kind, very personable. I was really impressed. And the atmosphere seemed quite family-like. I didn't see many women impersonating some stereotype of men, or men impersonating some stereotype of women. It seemed very traditional, family-oriented, actually, with plenty of little kids running around and parents taking care of them. These are just my simple observations. Not worth much, not scientific, but they're true by what I saw, and I traveled somewhat extensively. Of course, yeah, the people seemed so... They're even beautiful. Beautiful people, men and women, and so kind, and so intelligent. I mean, I thought of the Prairie Home Companion. It's like everybody here truly is above average. And I'm not just being like a proud Swede. I feel like perhaps, I don't know, some Norwegian got mixed into my blood. But no, I'm kidding. They'll joke like that. I asked one guy for directions. I had happened to mention to him that he's a young guy. I said, well, now, how do you say this? Because I thought you're supposed to say, Taksamuket. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, and he pronounced it a little better for me. But I said, well, when I was in Norway, they told me that it was Taksamue. And he said, well, in Norway they only have half a brain, but in Sweden we have the whole brain, and this is how we say it. So, anyway, I found that kind of racial animosity to be quite refreshing. Just in-your-face political incorrectness. Done in good humor. Both sides know that the other side is only somewhat serious. You know what? It would hit me at first, before getting off the airplane. I thought, wow, my feet are going to touch on the soil of my ancestors. And you get the idea that traveling is, like going to another planet. But it really isn't that way at all. Same with the experience of going to Rome. That we have a common earth, common sky. We're all people. So most everything really is quite familiar. That's refreshing. What do I have here? We visited the tomb of Sigrid Undset, so bought a huge novel of hers at the bidding of my son, who's read it. I normally don't read novels, so I do want to read that. It's about the medieval period. And that was beautiful that we found her tomb and Nathaniel read. So if you go to the Brigidaville website and see the picture and the video clip of Nathaniel reading from the Office for the Dead, that's who it's to, Sigrid Undset. And let's see, I went to the church in Karlstad. It was beautiful. It was small. It was they decorated it very beautifully and traditionally, but it was no cathedral. And it was, I don't know, a couple hundred people, I suppose. It wasn't huge at all. But you could tell by the priest from Africa who spoke Swedish well. He showed up in one of the pictures. And the main pastor. They were very serious, very loving, very traditionalist. It was a really meaningful Mass. That was refreshing. So I took pictures of that church in Karlstad when I stayed at the bed and breakfast there. And, yeah, it's quite amazing. I took a lot of pictures of the last place I stayed at. You can see that. And what was so amazing, my wife found that for me. It was only like $35 a night. And nice place to stay, convenient, close to enough to the airport that I had to get to the next morning very early. I ended up having to get up about 3:30 in the morning. Well, it turns out that was more than happenstance. That land was St. Brigida's and her husband, given them at the passing of her parents. And afterward, she handed it on to her monastery at Vidstina to the Brigittines. So that was very special. That's why I took so many pictures there, realizing I'm on the land where St. Brigida and her husband had their children. And I don't know for what years of their lives, but anyway, I was walking on the land that was theirs. And lovely place to stay. So if you're into St. Brigida, that's the place to stay. By the way, within 50 miles of that area are many runes. I brought back a replica of a rune, and most of them have crosses on them, back from the period of around 1000 or up to 1100. There's about 4,500 runes in the world. About 3,500 of them were within 50 miles of the place I was staying. And they have crosses on them. That was the period when the Vikings, who were, divided up into clans, were not yet unified as a nation, Sweden or the nation Norway, but soon to be. And where they were, many of them, those families, powerful families, had become Christian. And were at various stages in their development into holiness. So, What else do I have here for my notes? I took a lot of notes, but I'm only talking about some of them that were somewhat interesting, I hope. So, yeah, I did realize that, as I had mentioned, that I was going back to the land of my fathers and mothers, my heredity, that it is Swedish. And I'm a Christian, not a Gnostic, so I do take the Bible, the body, the human body, seriously. I am my body in a meaningful sense. And my body has been formed by my ancestry. And the Vikings, the people of that land, the Swedes, they are my ancestors, no others. So yes, they are my people. Now, in politically correct America, it's fine to say a thing like that if your people are something of somewhat of a minority, and good for them. I hope that they're proud of their people and proud of who they are. All of us being in God's image, God loving all people groups, all nations, wanting the best for each of us, and treats us as individuals, yes, but also plenty of scripture supports God treating people as people groups, as nations, cultures, whatnot. So, no, it doesn't make me a racist. No, it doesn't mean that I belittle minorities and their pride in their races. No, it doesn't mean that I hold the kind of pride that's divisive. But I'm not going to disavow who I am. If you've got a problem with that, tough. I hope you're proud of who you are too, because God loves you and God loves the people that you came from, as well as mine. All right, so let's see, on to another journal book where I jotted down some notes. I really realized that you have to be careful in following the news. I think I was getting too inundated with negative news. You know what? The world always has been very evil. There's always been Satan's work in the world, everywhere, all the time, practically. And sometimes a little worse than others, but it's always been heinous and evil. So we are told to, keep our minds on whatever's good and pure and noble. And that is really important, because just in understanding people too. I think I was listening to a little bit too much before I went to Sweden about what's sensational. Well, that's what makes news, right? What's sensational, which means problem spots. But if that's what you mainly are focused on, well then you'll know the problem spots. So in Sweden, that's Malmo. That's not how they say it, but I'll go with that. Yeah, that's a terrible problem spot. Is it true that cars are being lit on fire? That women are being gang raped? And assaulted otherwise? And that there are places where police are very hesitant to even go. And on and on. Yeah, that's all true. But that's basically Malmo. So I never got a hint of any of that at all in any of my traveling, which was rather extensive, of Sweden and Norway. No sense of that whatsoever. Now, I did ask some Arabic people for directions, and they spoke Swedish well, and like the Swedes in general, they were very polite, very kind, very helpful. So, another thing I realized is that traveling is very humbling. You don't know directions. The street names in Sweden, they're long. which means their print is smaller. I don't have very good eyesight. That's hard to see. My SIM card that I put in my phone was not usable for navigation. I ended up having to buy a Garmin, which I'm very glad I did. But for several days or so, I had to rely on maps and looking, and now and then if I would catch Wi-Fi, I would at least be able to follow the dot for the maps on my phone, which was helpful. But anyway, I had to ask for plenty of help for directions, and that's humbling. So that's good. I mean, we all have weaknesses. We all have our strengths, but to be in that position of being like a child, of having to ask for help. Because normally I wouldn't do that, but you're forced to, and that's healthy. So long as you don't wallow in it and hate yourself for being an idiot, then it's for developing humility and serving as occasions to talk with strangers. That was good. So, it was a bit of a spiritual pilgrimage, too. So, on the one hand, getting to know the land of my ancestry. Beautiful. And then getting to going to different places was just amazing. I mean, to go to the Cathedral of St. Olaf. What a magnificent cathedral. And how meaningful and beautiful. But to learn about St. Olaf's life. He's the saint who's depicted with an axe. Because he was a Viking and came to Christ. And took a period of decades in his road to sanctification. And in the process, anyway, some of what he did, though, we can think is like especially violent and judge it by our standards. Maybe some of that's true, but to realize what he was up against, warring Norwegian clans who needed to be united, needed to be turned from their Viking ways, because part of the Viking way, similar to a key doctrine of Satanism, paganism, is revenge. So, if somebody in one clan killed somebody from another clan, then that had to be avenged. And the way to do it, it wouldn't necessarily be for, a like punishment to the one guilty of the offense. No, anybody from that other clan, go ahead and kill. Because that kind of, it's not so individualistic, it's more clan-like, so then you've balanced the power between the clans. So revenge was a doctrine. That's just an example. Of course, the Vikings would create mayhem against other clans, and even within their own clans sometimes, and of course travel abroad, and they had no qualms with raping, pillaging, and plundering, quite literally. Of course, some of the Vikings were peaceable farmers, relatively peaceable, but this is what a St. Olaf was up against, along with, his, I think about his contemporary St. Eric in Sweden. So, you get caught robbing there, you get your hand cut off. You murder there, you get your head cut off. So it was, St. Olaf also was very just in the way that he applied his justice, in that it didn't matter if you were part of a wealthy clan, or if, you were nobility or whatever, you were a powerful person or a lowly person. Either way, he treated people the same. That's how he ended up becoming a martyr. That it was fine if you wanted to go to the town hooligans who were raising mayhem and cut their hands or heads off, that's fine. But you start doing that to the prominent, wealthy clan, and made enemies that way, and they killed him for it, and then they regretted it, and it was his life that brought Norway into not just these warring factions, but into a nation, and he was recognized soon to be a saint. So I take him to be a saint, to be prayed to for help, encouragement, guidance, as a good example in our own times. Because now, in America, masculinity is thought to be toxic. Well, he didn't apologize for his masculinity, and it was very needed, and he's depicted that way. So that was just amazing, praying there. At different cathedrals, I lit one for my wife, and I lit at one place, and I lit another for the Grand Rapids, family of my wife and Micah and Aaron, and then another place I lit a candle in prayer for Nathaniel. So, where else did I go? Yeah, Karlstad, I mentioned that was a beautiful service. Yeah, very meaningful. And then at Vidstina, I prayed there before some of the relics of St. Brigida. That was, the sisters were still there. I don't think that the sisters are going to forget me. Well, I met one sister and talked about somewhat the problems in Sweden and America that we're facing and what we're up against, and that was great. And she told me, well, come back, ring the doorbell. Sisters would like to talk to you and get to know you a little bit. I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I did. I rang the doorbell. And I noticed on the wall it said something in Swedish, looked like cloister, whatever. And I thought, maybe this is a cloistered monastery? I don't really know. Well, I don't speak Swedish. So anyway, I ring the doorbell. And nothing happens. Then it opens. And nobody's there. And I thought, well, I guess they see me on camera and I'm welcomed in. So I walk in. And there was one lady assisting one of the sisters out to go to a medical appointment. And she says to me, "Get out!" So I walked into a cloistered monastery as a man. Anyway, I guess another funny story that helped me realize, yes, go ahead. Spend, $180 on that Garmin. Just get it. Do it. You need it. Was before that, when I was looking for a store, I was confused in my driving, and a lot of the roads there in Sweden are very narrow. They're all very nice roads. Nothing like what we have in Michigan here. I never saw anything as atrocious as these roads. They were all very nice. But they were much smaller. It's uncommon to have the super highways that we have in America, or even, the big 4-lane highways. Well, anyway, I saw one and thought, well, perhaps this is another one of those small little roads, and realized I was getting onto a bicycle trail. So it's like, okay, yeah. I'm asking, that right there would probably be at least a $180 ticket. Of course, in kroners, that's like 10 times that price. So, I thought, yeah, get the Garmin. Good call. Well, I'm running out of things to say. I followed just a few of the notes that I had written. But where else? Of course, we met with Nathaniel and his friend, his seminarian friend, Michael, and it was wonderful to be there. I was by myself for a few days to begin with, by myself a few days at the end, with them in the middle. That was fantastic, perfect. We ended up regularly going to restaurants, but oddly enough, I never did go to a Swedish restaurant. So anyway, I had good Malaysian food and Thai food, and went to a Burger King and a McDonald's and whatnot. So yeah, food is nothing to write home about. Of course, my priest, who's a proud Italian, told me that Swedes don't have good food anyway. So, I'll compare to the food I had at Rome. I suppose he's right. So, anyway, oh my goodness. I took pictures of places that we visited, but the mountain roads, as we got up central and higher up into Norway, were incredible. Now, driving on them in the dark, very windy, very narrow, steep precipices, all the roads, Norway and Sweden, typically all of them, practically no runoff, no place to park your car on the side or to run off. So it was very tiring when I had to drive at night, and I had to slow way down. But just magnificent scenery, beautiful roads. So we had the three of us had a great time together. Enjoyed their company a lot. And for them too, being priests in seminary next to the Vatican at the NAC, it was quite a bit of a spiritual trip too. So I also prayed at I went to Old Uppsala, and St. Eric first was buried there, and beautiful mounds were there. That's the place where the Vikings much earlier, I suppose before 1080, did human sacrifice. Bumped into a young man there, very, very kind, good-looking young man, and told him that it was a bit awkward for me, though, in that on my mother's side, I'm a Skadi. They say Hwitta, and yet 5 years ago I became Catholic, so it was on my mother's side Sharpshooter Skadi, who was tutor to King Gustavus Adolphus, who ran out the Catholics, and certainly including the Bridgetines from Sweden, and confiscated all these magnificent cathedrals that I took pictures of. Now, a scholar I talked with later told me with, absolutely, that if it weren't for some of Gustavus Adolphus' sons, a couple of them, who became Catholic, or who were Catholic, then undoubtedly those cathedrals too would have been destroyed. So that animosity against Catholics from the Lutherans was very intense. And so that's my Skadi side. And while also I'm Catholic, and so I told him my little inward dilemma there. It's no dilemma. I mean, I'm Catholic, and that's what matters. So, even though I respect my heritage, and had a little talk with my grandfather there. He's buried at Uppsala Cathedral, the newer Uppsala. But anyway, he said, well, we ran them out, and now we're busy finishing running out the Protestants. And so I said, yeah, well, what you're ushering back in then are the pagan gods, Odin, Thor, and Frey, worshipped by the Vikings, where, on this ground of Old Uppsala, humans were sacrificed. When is that? Is that coming back too then? So it really is quite amazing to look at this history and see how we're turning, America and Sweden, much of the world, is turning deliberately to paganism. So much of Silicon Valley and the technocracy with their Burning Man festival and similar festivals are turning deliberately to paganism. And in this context, you can see it very clearly. I mean, what is it that Christianity did? It said, hey, We need to not have vengeance. We need to, have mercy and forgiveness and loving your neighbor and all that, all of the Christian ethic. And we can't steal. We can't go raping and pillaging and plundering. We can't treat women this way. Men can't be having 3 wives. And it was a dramatic shift in Scandinavia from the paganism of the Vikings to Christianity. Certainly for the better. Especially if you were a woman, you'd think so. But for anybody, really, of course. So, anyway, that we're turning back to paganism is really, you just realize what a spiritual warfare we're in. Quite literally. But with everybody there being above average, beautiful, smart, polite, wealthy, it makes evangelism difficult. I wonder how they approach it there. I guess to some extent we have that same problem here in America, where we've enjoyed a lot of prosperity, a lot of freedom, a lot of success, and thus a lot of pride also. Not a healthy kind of pride, though. And how do you evangelize people that don't feel like they need to be evangelized, not realizing that they need forgiveness, they need salvation, that their pursuit of pleasure and pride can't satisfy them, that they're called for much more than that. So, I guess that's all I have to say about my wonderful trip to Sweden. It started off quite tiring. I finished grading at 12:15 midnight. I had to get up at 4:15 to be off and on my way. And then getting back home was a harrowing experience. I get a call from my wife at about 1:30 in the morning, when I had my alarm set for 5:30 in the morning, saying, "Hey, the SAS is on strike, Scandinavian Airlines, and here's your new plane." So that was 2 hours earlier. So I got up at 3:30 in the morning instead of 5:30, and dropped the rental car off and got to the airport and got dropped off at the right terminal, Terminal 5. But it said no, that my new plane, United, now is going out of Terminal 2 instead. It was a very long airport. I had to walk the whole way, long walk. I got there huffing and puffing, and they said, well, we'll open up in about 45 minutes, so I had to wait, only to find out eventually that, no, it says United here, but that'll be my connecting flight, that actually I am SAS. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense because SAS is on strike. I said, I'm sorry, you'll have to go back to Terminal 2 and talk to them about it. So I went on a very long walk back to Terminal 2, huffing and puffing and sweaty. And they said, well, yes, this is one of the few planes that is going out for SAS. So got on my plane. What a relief. Then as I get off my plane, it was delayed. So I was getting off my plane at the same time as, again, a good walk away, the new plane was boarding. So I'd mentioned that to a stewardess and a flight attendant, and she signaled ahead. So when I got there, they let me go to the front of the line for checking in my baggage, going through the, security check, and made it on the plane with literally about 1 or 2 minutes to spare. So barely made it. And took that, that was in London, took that back to Chicago, and then again did the commute. Had to take quite a walk to get to the transit. Took the transit to near the Union Station, and then had to walk several blocks to get to Union Station, and then had to wait a few hours for the train. So by the time I got on my train, I was really beat. and got home and had about 2 days of real jet lag. And now tomorrow morning, this is why I'm audio recording this instead of typing it up, I have at least about a 12-hour day of teaching 2 classes on the motorcycle range, both tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday, and then a new semester starting right away next week. So, really happy to have packed this in here. So grateful to GRCC for giving me the exam week off, letting those be vacation days. So, a lot of people to thank and a lot to appreciate. A wonderful trip. I certainly encourage anyone to thinking about going to Scandinavia to do it. Just beautiful. And signing out.